Good afternoon. It is now 1:30 p.m. Tuesday, July 9, 2019. Regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. We're starting in on our our afternoon session. First item up is item 10A, and I'm going to read all of this. Quite a bit of reading here. First reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on Ordinance 1377 in the matter of amending the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan, RCP, to adopt the 2019 Solid Waste Management Plan, SWMP, a special purpose plan of the RCP as an amendment to the proposed SWMP and adopting a savings and severability clause, and ordinance number 19-04 in the matter of amending Lane Code 16.404 to reference the 2019 Solid Waste Management Plan adopted with Ordinance PA 1377 and adopting a savings and severability clause, file number 509 PA 19-05381. And with us to discuss this is Jeff Orlandini, Waste Management Division Manager, and Dan Hurley, Lane County Public Works Director. This is to set the reading and public hearing for July 23 at 1:30. So, Mr. Orlandini, please proceed.
Thank you. Appreciate you reading all that. I will save a second reading of the same items. So on June 12th, we are in front of this body to do an overview of our newly proposed plan. We then went on June 18th to the Planning Commission and presented it to that body, which unanimously approved it. And so we are indeed now asking you to make a motion to approve the first reading and to set the public hearing and second reading that will happen on a time certain 1:30 on July 23rd. And lastly, the plan again is intended to update the 2002 plan to include the current state of waste management practices and to serve as a work plan for our division staff.
Okay. Any questions by commissioners or any motion to approve? Commissioner Bozovich.
So I'll move approval of the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing for ordinance number 1377 and ordinance number 1904 for July 23rd, 2019 at a 1:30 time certain.
Okay.
Second.
And it's been moved by Commissioner Bozovich and seconded by second by Commissioner Buck to approve the first reading and setting the second reading on the public hearing for ordinance 1904 and amending the solid waste management plan. So further discussion on the motion. Seeing none, we will go to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. And the motion is 5-0. All commissioners voting in the affirmative. So we'll have the public hearing now on July 23 at 1:30. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have item 10B, which is a work session. The board requested on the concept of a Conestoga camp at 13th and Tyler. And Mr. Buller, please come forward. With us at the table is Dan Hurley, Lane County Public Works Director, and Corey Buller, Lane County Events Center Manager. We set this up for a 10-minute presentation by staff, by up to 30 minutes. That is always a estimate, followed by estimated 30 minutes of questions from the board. So welcome, Mr. Hurley.
Thank you, Chair Sorensen. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So we're here to discuss in more detail a proposal to site 3 Conestoga huts in the northwest corner of the Lane Events Center property. This is an idea that I think has been battened around for maybe a couple of years before my time as director. We hadn't received a more detailed proposal when we asked questions before of the group. So it's We have since received that, so I believe Ms. Mosley was here, okay, and we haven't met yet, and spoken public comment to the board a couple months ago, and we were looking for a more detailed proposal. They have presented one. We still have some more questions on that after reading through that and wanted to talk through that today, but we do have some concerns about wanting to have some more public engagement and making sure the neighbors have been heard on the issue. We also have some concerns just about security and want to talk through those. We haven't met with the group, and I would suggest that maybe that's the next step to talk through the finer details. But at a broader picture level, wanted to present this to the board as a concept, as something that we can do to address in a small way the current housing situation to provide some more options in the community.
Okay, how would you like to proceed on this? Would you like to just get into questions from the commissioners, or how would you like to
I would
proceed?
like, yes, to hear your initial feelings on the matter, if there's specific concerns you'd like us to explore, and then I would like to have Ms. Mosley or someone else from your group join at the table, and we can talk through some of those concerns and maybe set some direction for how we can work through to try to get to some sort of yes on this.
Okay, well, Ms. Mosley, do you want to?
Is also here who runs the Conestoga.
Okay, that would be great.
So if she
Okay.
could join us as well.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you.
Okay, why don't you come up to the table? Looks like we can get another chair up here. And Ms. Mosley, if you could introduce yourself and introduce your guest as well.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jay Mosley. I live about 1 block from the site that we're going to talk about, on the corner of 13th and Tyler. Been interested in this project for about 5 years and been talking to neighbors and done 2 surveys. This is Faye DeBurr, sorry. And she and her husband, Eric, are actually responsible for CSS that is going to be supervising the Conestogas. They are very well respected in town, have lots of Conestoga sites around town.
What's CSS?
Community Supported Shelters.
Okay, all right. Okay, so, Mr. Hurley, do you want us to just start asking questions, or how do you want to handle this?
Actually, if I want to pass to Corey and talk about some of the concerns he has just on the business side of the fair and
Absolutely.
the impact of climate, the
Yep.
clients.
Yep.
Good afternoon, thank you. So, yeah, this has come up as a proposal in the past a few times. We did some initial outreach to some of our longstanding clients, received some feedback. We did that again this time, received some general feedback. Initially, there's some concerns over safety, security, keeping things in a marketable condition when we're trying to attract new business. Anything that can impact that could have an impact on their shows. So they have those concerns. In addition, the Fair Board has some concerns regarding the use during the fair. So we would like to see this proposal work its way through the Fair Board. The area located out there at 13th and Tyler is actually a prepaid camping and parking location during the fair. And the adjacent campsite is actually the 4-H and FFA youth. So I don't see that as a mutually shared space during the fair, and I think the Fair Board would agree with that, so.
So we would like to explore the possibility of vacating during the fair, but we haven't been able to have those conversations yet. Also, just wanting to make sure that there is sufficient public engagement. I guess there was a survey a few years ago, and there was the intention for some more outreach, and maybe we can talk to that. But this area is currently inside the gate, so we have some concerns of that. So we've asked, and they have responded under the proposal that there would be fencing to fence off this area from the rest of the fairgrounds, just for security issues. And so I think that addresses that part of it. So, Ms. Mosley, do you want to talk from there?
I just wanted to respond with a question, I guess. As I said, I live just a block from it, so I've been watching this corner for about 10 years, and it's rarely used. Last summer, I believe it was, and 1 year it was used by the sheriff department for parking.
Yeah, I think
But
it's just
otherwise,
primarily
I'm
during
not
the
seeing it
fair.
used very much, although I know you are holding it for possible uses, but I'd still like to
Right, and let me speak to that too, that we are interested in a longer-term use on this property, exploring that as a possible site for a supportive housing site. However, it's zoned currently R1, so we would need to go through some rezoning on that, and I'm not sure the process and how, if the city would be willing to rezone that property, but it's one of the sites that we are looking at with Health and Human Services.
Can I respond to that? We're aware of that and realize it is really temporary.
Right, so
Know
this
that.
is a shorter-term use. as we
Exactly, it's
explore
just, let's make use of it in the meantime.
Exactly.
Could I speak a little bit to outreach? Because the Jefferson neighborhood is very willing to host and they were hoping to be here today, but Country Fair got in the way. They're willing to host a outreach information session. That's a given. In the past, I've done 2 surveys of the immediate surrounding neighbors on that lot and got no negatives. The third thing that we've done is to send a notice out in the JWN newsletter, Jefferson Westside Neighbors newsletter, in which we presented the proposal, asked for comments, didn't get anything.
Okay.
Yay or nay, but especially no nays. So,
And we'd be willing to have a facility at Lane Event Center to have a meeting if
Yes.
that works.
JWN would be glad to sponsor it too.
Now, I have definitely received some, comment on all this, and I'm wondering if you can, any one of you can address the issues of, I've heard this is just 3 Conestoga. Is that for 3 people, or is that for 3 families, or what are we talking about when we use the term 3 Conestogas?
I mean, they hold family then. So it really needs to be a decision of either community supported shelters, how we want to hold it. We don't currently serve families. We serve people that are 18 and over through our program.
Okay.
So I suspect that that's probably what we would do, is serve singles and couples. But we're certainly open to having more sites for families. There's a huge need for that as well.
Okay, but as you understand it, this is for singles or couples, not for families.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then the other thing is, are the people that go into these Conestogas, are they screened for things like criminal background or anything like that?
So we do all the vetting for the people that are in our safe spot communities. The vetting for most of the Conestoga huts that are at car camping sites, that's done by St. Vincent de Paul. So for our safe spot programs, we do review, we look at mugshots, we look at HMIS, we connect with the folks in our program, the leads in our program, to see if they have connections to somebody. We really build a picture of who someone is before we start bringing them into our communities, because it really has a big impact if someone's unstable or they're not being honest. We really expect people to be honest with us, and we don't discourage or we don't disallow anybody from applying to our program. So anybody, or they could be a sex offender, they can be, have a violent record, they can apply, and we're going to engage them about the behaviors that they have on the record. And we're going to see how current they are and see what their behaviors have been in the homeless management system in the community.
I guess I've been approached by people that are concerned that maybe their stuff would be stolen if they were exhibitors at the Lane Event Center, or there are children present because there's the Catholic school that borders onto the fair property. I realize it's on the other side of the fair property, but it's still bordering on the fair property. What can you say to assuage the concerns that the people chosen to live at that site will be appropriate given the possible conflicts that might be there?
Well, we all, I think everybody in this room really wants it to be a success if it can happen. And so we're going to be really thoughtful about who we place there, and we're probably going to place somebody that's been in our program for several years, that really understands the culture that we work to create in our communities, that can be the lead. And then, of course, we would absolutely want to collaborate with the fairgrounds to make sure that, you know, we don't have SOs there because it's right next to the 4-H. That's fine. We just have that boundary for that site. We can structure the site based on what some of the needs of the fairgrounds are as well.
Okay, I know other commissioners have plenty of questions. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, but mainly a few comments. And, you know, Corey, I brought this up at the Fair Board probably 3 months ago was the first time we began discussing it. So the Fair Board has heard about it, and generally speaking, my interpretation is that there's a favorable response, assuming that some of the questions can be answered. Now, when you survey people and say, just give them a generic question regarding three formerly homeless people living on the fairgrounds, the response isn't necessarily taking into account the actual nature of what the site would look like. And if you were to visit community-supported shelters and you see the type of order that is involved and the type of screening and day management, I mean, just the management of the facilities, you'd realize that this is not a haphazard arrangement. It's absolutely structured, it's organized, and people who are living there, I would anticipate have jobs, maybe are students, but have active lives that they are pursuing. They simply don't have a permanent place to live. And we have a lot of people like that in our community. So once again, you know, I serve as the Commission liaison to the fair, and in recent action, I became a voting member in case of a tie or a need for quorum. And I've had a chance to vote one time, but I doubt that when it comes to the Fair Board, I'll be a voter on this. However, my discussion will be surrounding the nature of the people and the type of settlement that would be involved. And Corey, you talked about fencing it off. It's a relatively small area, and to keep it fenced and screened, it seems to me, do you see any problem fencing it and screening it? I think against that fence, we have a couple of places where some storage is taking place that looks
Yeah, it
pretty
depends on the
unsightly.
actual location that's chosen out there. If they need access to a gate, it has to be closer to 13th Street because that's the only gate in that area. So to fence it off and actually have access to a gate, it kind of dictates where it's going to be. Then it kind of closes off a portion of that field, depending on how big it is. So until we actually saw a footprint, we wouldn't be able to, you know, kind of tell for sure. But in general, I think for the most of the year, a fence line and a scrim would probably cover most of it. Again, that is our gate that we use for parking and camping during fair, so it's not compatible during the fair, but the rest of the year it could be.
Then a couple of questions surrounding the actual physical setup. The actual footprint for 3 Conestogas is really quite small. It's less than my 4,000 square foot lot at home, far less than that. So it doesn't take up a great deal. And it is formerly R1. There used to be houses right in that very location, so it's zoned R1, which does not preclude another gate in the fence. You know, it's actually just relying on the existing gate isn't necessarily what we would have to do. A gate, even a driveway, because there was a driveway there previously. So all of this.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's where the gate is.
Yeah, okay, that's where the driveway was. But, you know, so I think looking at accommodations and how we can get to a yes on this, understanding that this is temporary, you know, because ultimately, Mr. Manel and I have talked at length for a long time about what could potentially go into that northwest corner, something that more permanently and more sustainably for the future serve our community. But my point is that it's a relatively small footprint. It's relatively low overhead and low impact. And it seems to me that a fence, a separate fence screening would make it so that the people who are attending the fair or camping nearby would not even notice that it were there. And I base that on observation of existing community-supported shelters facilities that you really sometimes have to look to even know it's there. So, so I may have further questions, but it's just comments as to the relatively low impact, low footprint, and actual successful history. Mr. Burris?
I just wanted to say again, we're not going to place anybody at this site that we don't have a long-term relationship with. because there's too much at stake. So we're going to place people there that we know are going to do well there and be a good representation for the fair as well.
Thank you. And Jay, your being here and speaking for your neighborhood, that has a huge impact, because initially that was one of the obstacles, was how are the immediate residential neighbors going to respond? And what you're saying and what I'm hearing from them as well as you is that arms open, that this is actually.
I didn't do a survey this summer, but the past 2 summers I have. Now, there are a lot of rentals, and that's not to say there haven't been some changes of opinions, but by and large, everybody said yes. And there's a woman who lives right across, right on that corner, right there, and she has children, and she said, oh, I've been thinking a long time we should use that lot for some homeless solution. So she's certainly not worried, but I didn't find anybody who had any concerns. Most people were saying, I think it's a good idea.
Well, I walked that portion, the last 2 Fair Board meetings, and went all the way to the corner, and taking pictures from the corner, you can't even tell there's a fairgrounds over there. It's so
You really
remote.
can. It's about 6 blocks
Yeah.
away from the fair proper.
Very, very remote, and a lot of grass in between. Of course, it becomes occupied at certain times of the year. But, well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for indulging me in a little bit of extra time.
I'm very familiar with the lot in particular. In a prior life, I moved the house that was once there, so I've seen that nothing has really happened there in a very, very long time. So this is timely in our needs of housing. I've also received, phone calls from vendors who are a little skittish, and of course, we know that the Fair Board is also looking out for their needs, and so I'm definitely supportive of making sure that we go further with the discussion between all the interested parties, and making sure that it is mutually agreed upon and that there's good relationships there, because when those relationships deteriorate, we've got some significant issues. But if everybody comes together and, the rules are drawn out fairly and everybody feels supported, and I think that this could be a really good solution, even if it's really just 3 households, but it's 3 less households on the street. And since you had mentioned that St. Vinny's has some kind of involvement in this particular situation, even if it's just screening, I just need to declare that a potential conflict of interest, because I'm related to the director of that agency.
Okay, Commissioner Bozovich, then Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. So, going to earn my nickname again. So I remember when that house got moved off this early in my career as commissioner, because we purchased these parcels. They weren't a part of the original Lane Events Center. Can you tell me what the source of funding for the purchase of those parcels was?
T Capital.
I was pretty sure of that, as of my memory. So TRT is transient room tax, for those that don't speak government acronym. And it is taxes collected from the lodging industry meant to promote tourism and economic development that will bring in more lodgers into the area. So we purchased that property with taxes intended to support the lodging industry. So one of the things, we ran into this when we wanted to try and use an area that was purchased with road funds. Is that an appropriate use of that property purchased with that tax source? And that's a question, that's more of a question that I think legal counsel needs to weigh in on some, and not necessarily whether it's legal, but is it kind of a breach of what we promised when we collected that tax from the lodging industry about how we would utilize that tax? And I would guarantee that most lodging industry would not think that this was putting heads in beds, as they like to put it. So that's a concern of mine, as I know that was purchased with transient room tax. In addition, most of the operations of the event center are in an enterprise fund supported with the funds they receive from people that use the fairgrounds that have expressed some of the concerns about this, and capital transient room tax dollars to maintain the facilities there. So again, it's a mixture of the users of the fairgrounds and transient room tax. So I've kind of got a little bit of concern about just that mix and using something that was intended to draw people into the area from out of the area and support our tourism industry, outside of that. So we need to resolve that. Beyond that, as I look, we already have talked about back and forth a couple times with the community. We're talking about meetings with Jefferson Western Side neighbors. I'm looking at a couple of highly paid staff at the table here. We're only talking 3 sites. Is our effort as a county on homelessness better spent developing our 75-bed shelter or spending $10,000 or so for 3 temporary sites? Because we all agree this is not a permanent use of this property. So just thinking about where we should be putting our efforts in some ways. I don't, it's a nice solution. We put $42,000 of county funds into the expansion of into the UGB of the City of Eugene's overnight camping program, and we've only been able to get 2 sites out of that $42,000. And I can't tell you how much staff time was spent trying to explain to the citizens of Santa Clara and River Road what the overnight camping program was, including my own time at several public meetings and Commissioner Farr's time. So, and that was for 10 potential sites. And I just, as we look at 3 sites and whether we ought to be thinking about, how much money we are investing in this versus is that enough to support, some of our winter strategies relative to the Dawn to Dawn program. Just want to try and put that in focus of return on investment, and also the issue around transient room tax. Those are some questions for me, personally, and it has nothing to do with security and the people there, because I had to make those arguments with the folks out in Santa Clara about what a great job St. Vincent de Paul does is screening people, how low the call incidence is to these overnight campgrounds compared to the general population. They actually have a lower police call incidence. So I was out there selling this, so I know those aren't my concerns. My concerns are about what we've promised the lodging industry, and also for 3 sites, this is going to be a big lift. And do we spend that kind of effort maybe somewhere else?
Hey, I don't know if you remember me. We, do you?
Legislative tour.
Yeah. We were sitting next to each other on the bus, and I was learning a lot of stuff. It's nice to see you again. I, for one, I perceive this a little different. What I understand is it's not being used now, and at least this could be a temporary use until there's a permanent use. The other thing that was interesting to listen to you, Commissioner Bozovich, is it sounds like Mr. Manella and Commissioner Farr have another potential permanent use for it that doesn't sound like tourism either. So I don't know where we go with all that. I tend to side on the housing side of all of this. So it seems to me that if we could get to yes, if we could, that this would probably be used by your group to showcase how one could, in fact, and provide, I would imagine, some of the, I don't know, the best, for lack of, it's not the right word, but you know what I mean, tenants to demonstrate how Conestogas could be integrated into communities as a temporary shelter solution. And if we can get to yes, and that in fact is what can occur, and it's temporary until there's a permanent thing, and it meets with the requirements of the Fair Board, and you got a bunch of neighbors that want to say yes, I'm all for getting there, for what that's worth.
Thanks for that summary. I wanted to ask a question more on the proactive side of whether, and it's kind of follows up on what was mentioned, that if we can show that having people live in these Conestoga, my understanding is that's not going to change the definition of how many people are housed in Lane County. It's not going to change the number of people that are housed or unhoused, because these folks are considered unhoused. So we're not changing the housed versus unhoused ratio in Lane County by this. But it is a shelter, and it is more human dignity than otherwise would occur. I want to kind of go to a positive, and that is, I understand a number of churches and businesses have taken advantage of the fact that there are people that are willing to live in Conestogas at parks or at churches or at industrial sites, and that their presence provides some security and safety, and the issues of vandalism go down when there are people there. I remember a few years ago, my mom called me up and said, "Hey, aren't you in charge of the fairgrounds?" I said, "No, I am not in charge of anything, especially not the fairgrounds." She said, "I've always wanted to go over there. Can you take me over there?" So I went over there with her, and we went back to where the cattle barns were, and there were a bunch of homeless people in there. And she said, "Well, does the county allow this?" I said, "Well, officially, no, but that's what's happening. People are camping under bridges, and they're going wherever they can go." I'm just wondering, could this be optimistic in the form of, we're trying to provide some additional security for the buildings, for the structures, and is that a component in who you place?
It certainly could be. Several years ago, a South Town Center, or what did they call it, Tamarack Wellness Center, they were having some break-ins pretty regularly. And Todd Schneider was worked for EPD at that time. It's a crime prevention specialist, and he suggested to them that they get a hut. And so now that the same gentleman's been at the site for almost 5 years. He provides on-site supervision. He doesn't engage with people if there's a problem. He just has a phone that the site pays for, and he calls the police, or he calls Cahoots or whatever like that. They haven't had any problems, and he's actually a valued member in their community now. Like, he helps out with the site. So, yeah, it's possible.
Is that true for parks as well as churches? Like, does this?
Yes, at the Unitarian Church, Vicky's been there for a few years. She's definitely a watchdog at that site, and she manages their gardens, and she also helps with the free food program that happens every month, and she lives in a Conestoga hut there. So we've built over 100 Conestoga huts so far, which is kind of wow. They're all out in the community, primarily at churches. So it's worked really well, collaborating with St. Vincent de Paul in terms of having host sites, and each site is different in how they structure their program with the people that they're hosting. So some places are like, yeah, we just need some extra security. Oh, we need somebody to just receive this food when it comes every Wednesday. We need, so it really depends. We can really work with the fairgrounds to provide people that would have even skills that would be helpful to the fair if they were interested. But we have talked about moving some of our leads that have been camp managers in our camps to this site as a seed to really have it be a successful site. And like I said, we wouldn't place anyone there that we didn't have a solid relationship with and understanding of their character.
Have you placed people near schools before?
Well, the ordinance doesn't allow for that, hasn't allowed for that for the rest stops. Yes, there are some churches that are nearby schools. That doesn't.
Maybe they run church programs for children in the church.
I would say that churches that have church programs for children, they haven't been people that have, or congregations that have hosted huts.
Okay.
There's been some fear there.
And then on the legal question that was asked about whether or not the site can be used for any purpose other than connected to the visitor industry, what research has been done on that? Because if we are thinking of a longer-term proposal for that site in terms of housing, would the, let's say, a harsh interpretation of the rule would be, well, you bought it with those funds, it can only be used for that one purpose and can never be used for any other purpose, and could not even be sold or transferred or its use changed without a full compensation, comparable to the road fund and the strict rules on the road fund. So
Chair,
do either you
we
or-
did pose that question to county council. And the TRT funds don't have those strict rules like the road fund. Council's opinion was that we would not have to, if we were to use it for a different use, we would not have to pay back those funds, and there wouldn't be strings attached to it. But it does possibly put us in a bad light if we're using those for other.
Yeah, and is there any plan to have some other funds be used in place of using the land that has a value, a rental value? Is there any plan to make sure that that doesn't take place on the short term? In other words, if there's 3 people living there or 6 people living there in 3 Conestoga huts, and let's assume they're providing of no value, 0 value whatsoever to the benefit of the public and the benefit of the fair for reducing vandalism or being a deterrent. Let's assume 0 benefit, only cost. What is the fair market value of that site? What is the rental value of that undeveloped land?
I'd have to look into that, Chair. We haven't looked at
Yeah.
rental value.
Well, it's just an
We have the
idea
property
because
value.
I think that, I'm a big advocate of the visitor industry, and I can certainly see, whether there's a legal impediment or not, I can certainly see that, hey, we paid for these funds, or more accurately, visitors from outside of Lane County paid these funds to promote the visitor economy. If this is a temporary thing and it's going to start up hopefully after the fair, and it's going to be something where the folks from nonprofit groups that can place the appropriate people, well, then we don't want to be on bad terms with our visitor economy. We want to be on good terms with them. And some of the questions they've asked me, namely, will there be screening? I mean, I'm hearing there's lots of screening. And physically, I've been to the site a couple of times. And one thing that I was going to ask is who would be putting up literally some kind of arborvitae, some kind of physical screening for the, to demarcate what areas are part of this Conestoga area and what parts aren't. Who would do that, and where would that money come from?
Chair, we haven't explored screening. We've explored fencing, and that was part of their proposals.
Yeah, we have fencing. We have a lot of fencing, chain link fencing we can put up, and we would likely put slats in it. And then the people that are there, if they're into gardening, we would encourage them to have some potted things on the fence to just, to create more of a barrier. Can I say something else, Commissioner?
Yeah, sure.
So I know this probably sounds kind of kooky, but I'm going to say it anyways. So, Eugene is really leading the West Coast in addressing homelessness. And we are completely bombarded now with people from all over the country that want to know how we're doing what we're doing. They want to know how to build the Conestoga huts, and people are wanting to come visit us every week. It'd be so unique and special to have a collaboration with the county and the fairgrounds and local nonprofits to really showcase a model, and really put it out there. Like, look, we're doing this, we're having great success with this. It's going to bring more visitors to our community. And so I just want to throw that out there as an idea. And this is short term, so even those hotel funds could be used in a few years after, maybe this can help open up some more sites, just having something that we showcase as a community model.
And one thing that jump-started this was the Eugene Police Department said they were going to build a bunch of Conestogas. Could you tell us how that would work and who would donate those Conestogas?
So the Eugene Police Department purchased 10 Conestoga huts. Those are their Conestoga huts, that's their inventory. the huts that we put out and the huts that we're proposing to put at the fairgrounds, they would come out of our inventory and they would be still part of our inventory. So there wouldn't be any cost for them. The money
Are you
for us
kind
to.
of loaning these? Is that a way to look at it?
Sure. We just want to provide the vessel. If someone cares enough and has the capacity to host, we want to support them right away with, look, here's a shelter that you can use right away.
Yeah.
So, and the funding for the Conestoga huts, it comes from private donors. 80% of our funding comes from private donors. And people keep showing up. I had a guy call me yesterday. He wants to buy 40 huts for veterans, and he's bringing us $2,500 a month so he can be paying for huts and getting them out in the
How much
community.
do they cost?
We asked for $2,500 because that helps us, if we retain them, to maintain them over a 3-year period. Fix the doors, fix insulation, windows, things that get broken. So we build that into it. If we, like when we worked with Nightingale for their huts, we worked a deal with them. We didn't charge them $2,500. We just basically, was the cost of the materials.
Yeah, okay.
So.
Okay, well, I won't stop this discussion, but just to say, it sounds like the board is interested in more meetings, more discussion, and keep going. And with that, we'll have a second round. Let's just go in the same order we went in. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. I'll be very brief. When we tried to site a boys' home in West Eugene, trying to describe it to people, we could not put it into words. And even though it was going to be a wonderful facility that served kids in no other way, and it was not going to be harmful to the neighborhood, you can't describe it in words. What is so appealing about this project is it's not going to be words. It's going to be a visual of what a project looks like. And to me, this is kind of cracking the shell a little bit of using public land to provide temporary, though it may be, temporary shelter in ways that haven't been provided elsewhere. And Faye, you talked about how many people are coming to Eugene, Springfield, to this area to see what we are doing. And I can attest to that. Counties from all over Oregon are sending people to look at the things that you are doing and the things that other providers are doing in the entire community. We are a showcase in many, many ways that bring people here. And for me, this is the next step in the evolution, which allows the public land to be used in a very demonstrable fashion in order for more people to be able to see exactly how it does function. Trying to describe the sites that we were considering on churches, et cetera, in Santa Clara, people could not visualize it. We don't have to describe it. There will be a visual on this, and people can see what it looks like. If you go down to the Veterans Safe Spot, for instance, you see the orderliness that has been attendant there. It's really everything that you do. It has, I would showcase to the entire world, because it really is a model of how things can be done and how things can fit very neatly into the community surrounding them. So thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Chair, once again for the extra time you've allowed me.
I just wanted to make a small point. We are talking about transient room tax, and there's an argument to be made that when you get people off the street, it helps visitors want to come to our area. This is an indirect argument, clearly. But it's valid all the same. We need to be able to improve our neighborhoods, to be able to attract more business to our community. And this is a chance to make a modest impact in that. And I understand, Commissioner Bozovich's point, as to where we can make the biggest impact. And although this is modest, I feel like we have to make an impact across the spectrum, whether it's one individual or it's hundreds of individuals. Like, we don't have a choice to only be able to choose which numbers we need to care for. We need to care for every single human being in our community, regardless. And some will maybe be more efficient in higher numbers and some may not. But they're all valid, and it cares for all humanity in our area that really needs a place off the street. So I'm supportive. I know that there's these 3 options here in our board packet. I'm absolutely in favor of, the board directing county staff to to engage in further discussions and negotiate an acceptable agreement in the property. And I know that might take some time, but it certainly has my support.
Thank you. So you've alleviated some of my concerns about transient room tax. I appreciate that you've talked to legal counsel about that. And actually, you're doing a really good sell job.
It's my job.
So having had to gone out in Santa Clara and sell the expansion of the overnight camping program, I'm pretty familiar with the City of Eugene's rules. And even though this is county property, it's inside the City of Eugene, so I'm sure it has to follow their ordinance relative to that, which means there must be sanitation facilities supplied, there has to be trash pickup supplied, and storage of any materials has to be out of sight of the right-of-way and neighbors. Those are operational costs that are ongoing. Is that community-supported shelters that's going to be supplying that operational cost, or is that, where is that funding?
Community-supported shelters is going to take that on in terms of the porta potties and the trash service. And then we have a church group that builds boxes that go with the huts that have a lock, and they'll be responsible for making sure all those huts have locking boxes for people's personal belongings to be out of sight.
Good, good. Yeah, I think it can look like a really great demonstration site. I don't disagree with that. I think, and I'm happy we kind of dealt with TRT a little bit. So the final question I have, and this gets back to our TAC report. One of our issues is we get people into some kind of temporary situation and we're not moving them through the system. That was the major piece of the TAC report is we're not moving people along and then ultimately into permanent housing. And you just talked about residents that have been in their huts for 5 years or 3 or 4 years at a time. What is the case management for these folks and your plan to continue moving them through the system? Because and are you coordinating with other parts of our homeless provision system, the spectrum, to try and get these folks into permanent housing, that's appropriate for their level, because a lot of these people come with issues that prevent them from being your typical people that have a job, pay rent, and all that stuff. So I'm just kind of, when I hear that somebody's been at Tamarack for 5 years, that kind of that raises that bell that the TAC folks, put out there, which is we're not moving people through the system.
So the reality is we don't have enough housing for people. We just don't. So we're not going to move, we can move them around, but there's no housing to really move them into. And we're working really hard on trying to make that happen. But the reality is we can't build enough housing for a number of people that need stability. That's really the bottom line, is we have a lot of people in our community that are severely unstable, and that weakens our community as a whole. So the great thing about having more places for people to be is that creates a stronger community for us, which is where I want to be. I want to live where people are stable and they can compose themselves. It's not the case out there on the streets right now. So, so there's not enough housing. And then so we run the Safe Spot communities. We have great success in our Safe Spot communities because we do really heavy case management with people. Right now, we're talking with St. Vincent de Paul about doing case management at the sites that they manage, because the people in the car camping program aren't getting case managed. So we're actively working with Terry McDonald and his team to figure that out.
Excellent.
So case management is a huge piece that we talk about all the time. And in our Safe Spot program, over 60%, almost 70% of the people that move through the Safe Spot program move to a better living situation for themselves, which oftentimes isn't housing, we're conventional housing.
Yeah.
So.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I'm glad you're focused on case management, because that's definitively what our Fuse pilot showed is that's so key. Get folks into housing, whether it's a Conestoga hut or a hotel, but you have to have that intensive case management with it to really move them beyond that. And I appreciate that you're focused on that. So
That's our strength. It's really our strength.
I really appreciate that, and I love what you're doing with the safe space. So thank you.
I love that Commissioner Bozovich played to your strength. I have a challenge, and I don't mean this in a weird way, but here's my challenge. Assuming that we do get to yes, before huts are placed on this property, I would challenge you to have 10 additional sites that have agreed on the basis of a pre-agreed upon evaluation of how this went at pre-agreed times, that if everything goes well, they will commit to host huts on their sites.
So 10 new sites is the
Yeah,
challenge.
If in fact you're going to use this, right, as a demonstration with the hope of expanding into other sites, that would be my encouragement, my challenge.
Totally. But we need to have the site first. You're thinking we need the site, and then as we have that site, then we could get 10 more sites. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue tactics and strategies. I think we're on the same page. I don't want to waste the other commissioners'
Yeah, thank
time.
you.
But actually, I'd use this if in fact a commitment is made to garner
We would definitely
additional
leverage it,
commitments. Yeah.
for visibility.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I like that idea. The group that's spearheading this is the West Side Shelter Search Team. And we would not even have thought about it without the collaboration with CSS, because there's, as you can now know, you're so respected and so thoughtful and well-organized, and they're just the best. Now I've lost my thought. Dadgummit.
Happens to me all the time.
Anyway, the West Side Shelter Search Team is actually actively, we meet every month, and we're actively looking for sites. So this would only be a plus for finding more sites. I don't want it to be a condition before we can place the Conestogas. I think I don't see the point in that. But I think that using the placement of the Conestogas as a challenge to move more sites is very doable.
I agree. I never stated it as a condition.
Good.
I was simply trying to exploit the opportunity.
Okay, we exploit right back.
Okay, so I think you have some direction to continue the discussions, try to answer the questions that people are asking. And it sounds like a lot of those questions were answered today, but I'm sure there'll be more. And what is a reasonable time to come back to let us know what we're doing?
Thank you, Chair. I think we could come back in a couple months, assuming we can schedule a meeting fairly soon with your group.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. And I just really appreciate all of you for putting the time in on this and learning more about it and answering the questions from commissioners and the public. And I especially want to thank Jay for taking me to the site and keep pushing this, and I appreciate your efforts. I really do. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. Appreciate it.
So,
Back to 8A.
how much more time do we have, Commissioner Burney, of your time? You're going to have to leave at 4?
Ish, yeah.
Or ish, okay. Well, then, why don't we go back and finish the rest of Mr. Kyler's report? That's item 8C for those following at home. And he'll finish up with his report on the legislature. Then we will go to
Is that yours?
Commissioner's business. Then we'll see if we want to finish up more on the executive session. Is Mr. Dingle available for continuation of that executive session?
Yeah.
Mr. Mokrahysky?
Yes.
Is Mr. Dingle available if we keep going?
I believe so, but I'll
Okay.
verify
Well,
that.
if, it's 2:30 now, so if Mr. Kyler can finish up and the board can finish up over the next 20 minutes or so, then we'll have time to do the commissioner's business, and then perhaps the executive session.
Right, and we're going to push the investment policies
Yeah,
discussion to a future
yeah,
meeting.
we're going to roll and/or push and/or
Push,
delay
roll.
and/or do some other
Slide.
thing later. Yes. 8D. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Kyler, for coming back.
Thank you, Board. So just to give you the breeze through here, this is a document that I've just handed out. It is posted online as of this morning as supplemental material. This is a document you've seen before, right? This is, I periodically updated this document. It was the document that we went into the session with sort of a list of priorities, both policy and funding priorities. Some of this did come out of the last board, for example, in October of 2018, when the governor was developing her recommended budget. The board at that time wrote her a letter with some of the, particularly some of the funding issues that we've outlined on the back of this, the budget issues that we had hoped she would include in her recommended budget. So I would just like to breeze through this. What you can see is in the bolded letters is sort of the outcome of the issues. But our very top priority was to secure funding through the Oregon Courthouse Capital Construction and Improvement Fund for the courthouse project. And indeed, oh, I'm sorry. Our top priority was to actually, our top priority for funding was to get the courthouse project, but we had a policy bill that was related to that, where we were trying to ensure that both, there were two things that we were trying to ensure: that the law library could be considered as part of the footprint inside the new courthouse, making it eligible for 50% reimbursement from the state of Oregon. The other thing we were trying to work on, and this was in conjunction with Clackamas County, was to get language slightly changed in statute to recognize the value of land where you were going to place the county courthouse. Had we moved forward with the butterfly lot, we would have been in a bit of a pickle with regards to existing language, because we didn't purchase that site for the purpose of getting a courthouse built on it. In fact, it was donated back in the 1800s. And Clackamas County is in that same situation. They've got land designated. So we had a bill that designated the change and designated the change for law libraries. Unfortunately, we were just unable to make that bill advance. Commissioner Burney, you testified at Capital Construction. You recall, I think you had 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Trying to get all that in about a separate bill would have just been a real challenge, and the bill had been assigned to that committee, so it was really sort of an awkward situation. But the bottom line is we did not get that language. We can continue to work on it if we see a need for it. On our Tier 2 priorities, we had hoped for a House Bill 2104, which was a bill that the county administrator and I and Mike Coles from assessment worked on, that would have really bolstered the CAFA fund, the County Financial Function, or the County Assessment Financial Function Assistance Grant Program. It was, you know, we had really high hopes. I kept telling the Legislative Committee, it's still alive, it's still alive, it's still alive, but in the end, it just never did advance. We'll have to see. We need to have a bit of a debrief with the chair of that committee, Representative Nancy Nathanson, to sort of see what the challenges were for that measure. We did work on an issue related to permanent supported housing, and again, that was, we had a draft printed of that bill, and then OHA asked us to not move forward with that measure, so we did not. Again, you recall Senate Bill 368, that was related to some procedural changes around elections. That bill, while we did gain a hearing early on, did fail to advance any further out of Senate rules.
geez, so far this is not great, none of our stuff moved, but we had a video lottery bill to try to what we call true up the video lottery funding. That bill failed to advance. The good news behind that story is that video lottery revenues have gone up quite a bit, and the allocation, the legislature continued to use the same allocation, ignoring the 2.5%, which is in statute, and just appropriating a bunch of money. And that bunch of money included a $10 million boost over last biennium. So the county will see a boost. I've got to go back and sort of do the postmortem on that to see what it would have been under the 2.5% that's existing in statute versus the change, but we will do that. The next bullet, amend ORS Chapter 689, and a bill that had to do with naloxone, is a good story. We did have to do a little bit of mid-session machinations because we'd introduced it as a House bill and it ultimately passed as a Senate bill. But it did ultimately pass as a Senate bill, and that's a pretty good story. Representative Marty Wilde, as a freshman, introduced House Bill 3332 for us and became a co-sponsor of Senate Bill 910. And in fact, I saw he did like a YouTube video about one of his priorities being passed, and it was this bill. So he was pretty excited to be a part of it, and I think that was a good story. We had hoped to be able to work on a piece of land use legislation where we would create a new form of restaurant called a farm cafe that would be a farm-to-table restaurant. And unfortunately, we did get a bill written, but unfortunately, we're unable to even gain a hearing for that bill. Tier 3, we did get House Bill 2321 introduced and passed by the legislature. It's a bill that gives county juvenile justice employees, certain county juvenile justice employees, better privacy provisions under state law. So they live now under the public records exemption with certain public records are not accessible by the public for those employees. And we amended the Department of Motor Vehicles section of statute to ensure that those employees can get their employer's address listed on their driver's license and their vehicle registrations and all those sorts of things so they don't have to put their home address on those documents. And then moving to the backside, just to go through the budget here. The good news was we did get bonding authority for the courthouse in the full amount that we'd requested. The bill does provide us with $87.6 million in bonding authority, which exists for the entirety of the biennium. In practical matters, that means that we will have it really till about February or March of 2021 is when they do these sales for courthouses. We had written to the governor asking her to support a $3 million line item in her budget for post-prison supported housing, which was going to be located in Lane County and managed by sponsors. That did not make it into her recommended budget. The proponents of that worked to get it introduced as a standalone bill, Senate Bill 992, that was sponsored by Senator Lee Byer, and it did move down to Ways and Means, but never came out of Ways and Means. So that was a bit of a loss. And I did talk to sponsors about this. They've gotten a couple other funding sources, and so they're still hopeful in terms of the project, but certainly not going to have the state funding. We have long been, the next bullet outlines aid and assist. So we've long been identified as a high sending county in terms of having folks go from the jail up to the state hospital under a process called fitness to proceed. And there's never been adequate funding for the community resources necessary to provide an alternative to the state hospital. And so OHA's budget bill does include now $7.6 million over the next biennium for community restoration services. In the end of session bill, what we sort of commonly referred to as the Christmas tree bill, there was an additional $1.7 million in that to help a couple agencies work on that issue as well. So I think we've got some fairly good resources as a result of the funding actions. There's still challenges there, but it's a fairly good pot of money that will, I'm not exactly sure how it will all be allocated out, but certainly we, like I said, we are identified as one of the higher sending counties. Public health modernization is the next bullet. That's been ever since 2015, the proponents of that have been really trying to get about a $50 million appropriation. This session, we thought we had a path forward to about $14 million through tobacco tax proposal. Is sort of how the governor's budget outlined things. And that failed to materialize, but the OHA's budget bill did include an additional $10 million general fund for public health modernization. So really last session we got $5 million for public health modernization. So it was a doubling of public health modernization funding, which is a good thing. The next bullet outlines what I'd earlier referred to as behavioral health justice reinvestment. There was some work being done during the interim to really try to look at the justice-involved individuals who have either substance use disorder or behavioral health issues and get them out of the jail setting, try to minimize their use of the emergency room, those sorts of efforts. And that did become a bill, Senate Bill 973, and there has been $10.6 million appropriated for those efforts. They no longer call it BHJRI, it's now called the Improving People's Access to Community-Based Treatment, Supports, and Services Program. And my understanding is that the PSCC, or at least a subcommittee of the PSCC, has been looking at that issue and potentially will be making a proposal for some of those funding. The next item is long simmering issue in Lane County where we've been particularly interested in helping the community of Oak Ridge deal with some smoke issues, particularly wood smoke issues. We were able to, in 2017, get some changes to policy that would allow DEQ to use funds for certain projects that existed up in Oak Ridge. Unfortunately, there had never been any money into the fund that we amended. There was some I think we got like $175,000 at the end of session in 2017 for those kinds of efforts. This session, DEQ got $250,000 to focus on wood stove issues, and another $250,000 to provide increased communications around prescribed burns. I think it was this board or the previous board that provided comments to the smoke management rules? Previous board. So those rules have changed, and there are slightly more potential now for communities to have some smoke coming in to their communities from prescribed burns as a result of those rules being loosened a little bit. And so the DEQ has some new funding to help communities manage those communication efforts. A big one that came sort of late in the session, and thank you, Commissioner Buck, for really making sure that I was aware of it, and it was a priority for us. The Leeburg Fish Hatchery, which is owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, but operated under contract with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, was aced out of the governor's budget, and so there was a $1.7 million hole that they really weren't sure how they were going to fill. We managed to get $1.35 million into the end of session bill, and the Leeburg Fish Hatchery is still going to remain operational under ODF and W. So it was a huge lift, a lot of local proponents. Our delegation a lot of the delegation really went to bat for this issue, and there it is, Section 153 of the Christmas tree bill, so excellent. On the downside, and there was actually an article that I'd encourage you to read in the Oregonian today about this, specifically given the recent earthquake down outside of LA, but University of Oregon was unsuccessful in getting any funding for the shake alert system out of this year's legislature. They're going to try again. My understanding is that Representative Nathanson has really put this on her list of priorities for February. So hopefully, out of the sort of the challenging story out of LA, there will be some positive impacts for shake alert to be more fully implemented across the West Coast. And then finally, another issue that came to our attention a little bit later in session was a pilot project to establish a new manufactured home park in Springfield. That effort went through a couple different measures, but very late in session got amended into House Bill 2896, and $3 million is coming Springfield's way to develop that park. So that, I think, covers our sort of list of policy and budget priorities that we'd had going into the session, and I apologize for the quick rundown of those, but I know you guys are pressed for time, so.
No, good. This is very helpful, and thank you so much for both the first run at this before noon hour and now this. I was really glad that you got to the line, this measure passed both chambers and has been signed into law after several others on the first page. But that's the way, it goes. So we can always, we can't receive unless we ask. So appreciate all your strong work on this. Do commissioners have questions about the end of session update? Go ahead.
So Alex, you mentioned that in talking about the public health modernization, that the intent originally was to use tobacco tax to fund that, but there was in the last day scramble, referral to the voters in November 20, I think, of a tobacco tax. Is that earmarked for public health modernization, or is that just a generalized tobacco tax and that doesn't have, where, I'm trying to get it in my head. I know it's a pretty big increase on tobacco and vaping taxes.
Yeah, Chair Sorensen, Commissioner Bozovich, it's sort of an interesting story. They knew at some point in time that bill was going to be purely a referral. And so the initial bill as drafted had a lot of language about public health modernization and tobacco use prevention and all kinds of sort of jargon-like stuff. And they felt like if that was going to be referred, it could really be a challenge in terms of gaining voter understanding. And so the whole bill got really modified to become much simpler. And so if you read through the measure now, you'll see that it has 10% for tobacco use prevention, and that's about all it says. But understandable by the public, tobacco use prevention, but without the details of where those revenues will go. So conceivably, none of them could get to a county level.
Okay.
That could be an outcome of that measure.
Hoping that 10 million might be a bridge to the future tobacco tax for public health modernization, but there's no promise that if that does pass, that'll be utilized for public health modernization. Thanks. I just want to shake my head a little bit at the shake alert thing. For those of us that think that Mexico is backwards and, that's why people are trying to escape and come here, they had shake alert 25 years ago.
Like I said, interesting article in the Oregonian today about that system.
Drop in the bucket for what it concerns.
I just want to thank you very much for the effort that you put in throughout the session, but I know the hatchery kind of came as a little bit of a surprise there, and you worked really hard on that. I want to just publicly thank Representative Hayden, who really took it under his belt to help find a solution, and Senator Brzezinski, who is also helping on the other chamber on that issue. The community was so invested in that. Sean Davis and Tim Lowy leading the charge, and they did a wonderful job with
They really did. Yeah.
getting that community ground support. So I just want to publicly thank those folks for their hard work. I got great feedback from legislators on your work on behalf of the county, too. I just want to make sure you knew that as well. And one other bill that you touched on earlier that I think is hugely significant is the paid family and medical leave bill. It's one of the best, if not the best, in the nation. I'm extremely happy to see that that passed. I do know that it clearly has financial implications for our county, which we will have to address in our next budgeting cycle, if not a little bit sooner, depending on its implementations. My understanding that during 2020 is when collections of funding starts to occur, and then the following year, people can eventually start drawing on that. But I'd love to be able to keep in touch on how that actually rolls out for a county, which I'm certainly will, since it does have a budgeting impact. But it's just such a significant bill. I wanted to at least say something about that.
I think Commissioner Sorensen, Commissioner Buck, the only thing I can add there is a provision under that bill where a county can sort of design its own program if it feels like it has something that can meet or exceed sort of the standards of the rest. And you know, in certain instances, Lane County is self-insured, and so I think staff have already started to say, okay, is there something we could do? So it could be a fairly interesting story as it evolves to see which way staff recommends that the county go with it. And I'm sorry I didn't have enough time to really sort of delve into the details this morning. I think there's a fairly decent write-up of it, though, in the memo that is attached to your packet.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much. Are there any other commissioners want to make any comments? I think we're good, so thank you so much. Sure we'll learn more as the outcome is more clear, but thank you so much for what we know now. Okay, next I'd like to go to 11A, announcements. I only have one, and that is I'd like to continue to remind and encourage commissioners to keep Ms. Jones informed of your ability to make Tuesday and Wednesday meetings that are on our future agenda, so we can figure out which commissioners can attend which meetings. That's very helpful. I know several people have been doing that, so thank you for commissioners doing that. Are there any other commissioners who want to be recognized for announcements? Commissioner Farr.
Just late breaking news. The OHA put out a press alert today regarding the decision surrounding coordinated care organizations in Oregon. It's out. So Lane County will be splitting coordinated care organizations between Pacific Source and Trillium. So among other things. So I'm looking at Ms. Gaffney in the back of the room, and Lane County has its work cut out for it, doing this juggling balancing act that is before us.
Okay. Commissioner Burning and Commissioner Bozovich.
I just wanted to announce that I'm absolutely delighted to be heading to the Bay Area to look at waste-to-energy facilities. We will be looking at a variety of waste streams and how they are being recaptured by various groups to either be converted into energy or be converted into recycled products for commercial sales. And I think that I hope to have to share with this board and working with public works staff and landfill staff some exciting visions about how we might, Lane County might step up and marry waste mitigation with clean energy production, with local economic development, with incubating new technologies, and I look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Bozovich.
So I can't not say, it's time for fair.
Remove the wet blanket.
Yeah, time for the 50th here coming up this weekend, and it should be a rollicking time out there in Elmira or Veneta, however you want to look at it. It's kind of halfway between the two, but the Oregon Country Fair's 50th anniversary edition starts on Friday.
How is Little Road going to work?
Well, we're actually trying some improvements this year. We've worked with the campgrounds and the fair and ODOT and our public works folks. We are going to open the Maple Gate on Thursday for the fair folks to move in and out of, so they won't mix with the off-site campground move-in. So hopefully it'll be less traffic on Subtle. We've reduced the speed limit on Subtle over the weekend. The board supported that measure a couple weeks back. And they're going to have flaggers at Territorial and Subtle helping with that left turn movement so it doesn't back up as badly. And that's an experiment they're trying this year to see how it works. So there are some changes to traffic patterns out there that we're trying to actively work to prevent issues out there. And hopefully we'll do a little bit better with noise. And supposedly Verizon has quadrupled their equipment on top of Bolton Hill, so hopefully the cell phone service won't get bad. We'll see. I understand that during Garth Brooks, you couldn't get a call out on Verizon either over at Autzen, so it's not just the country fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Buck.
I must add that we are having Bohemia Mining Days also in the following week before our next meeting, so the 18th through the 20th.
Very good. Okay, we'll now move on to item 11B, agenda team requests and work session requests. I recall at least two that were discussed. One was on having a joint meeting with Sacred Heart and Oregon Health Authority, Governor's Office, regarding the future of the Nurse Midwifery Birthing Center, also with the advocates. The other one was the work session on the proposal that Mr. Eisenbach made about a housing bond. I thought there were three commissioners that said they were in favor of both of those, but I thought we should make it more formal, and Mr. Mokrajewski, when he does his review of assignments, would know. So I guess I'll say, are there three commissioners that want to do these two work sessions? Yes. Okay. Very good.
Mr. Chair, can we just clarify who you want involved in those work sessions? So on the housing bond, where is this just staff and the board? or do
This
you
is
want
the
other-
staff and the board, and I think Mr. Eisenbach has been doing a fair amount of work on this. So maybe Mr. Eisenbach, the staff, of course, anyone involved with housing that you want to pick to talk about a housing bond. That's kind of my idea, but other commissioners may have other ideas. Commissioner Buck?
Thinking of Better Housing Together as an entity with a broad coalition regarding that kind of.
And we are working on reviewing a potential contract with the lead staff person with Better Housing Together to work on a I'm not sure if it'll be multi-jurisdictional, but a housing action plan, affordable housing action plan. So that may be good. And I would think that we would also want some finance and budget staff if we're talking about.
And, Mike would also be valuable because of the dollar amount. He mentioned $50 million. He provided some detail on what that would cost the so-called average homeowner. But Mike would be a component of that discussion as well. I don't think in response to your question, I don't think I want to broaden that to like everything that's going on in housing. It was just more like the housing bond proposal, and to see if the board wants to move it forward or not after hearing a work session on that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think part of the work session is to define what it is. And you heard me mention that I had some inputs onto how to structure bonds in such a way that they really incent more investment from the private side, and we end up with more units in Lane County. So I think part of the work session is defining what it is we're talking about, structure, methodology, other people beyond that we would want to include in the process.
And I would also, I think we also
what
want
is
to
it?
talk about it in the context of all of the initiatives that we're focused on so that we have some alignment between various efforts and we're not.
Yeah,
And Mr. Chair?
yeah, go ahead.
We have staff who have been attuned to what's happening in Multnomah County and in Portland. So on your staff, Ms. Mokryski, you have people who are really well-versed in bonding for housing issues. So,
Then on the other item, the birthing center work
Yep.
session, who did you want? Peace Health representatives there? Who would be
Ideally,
part
it'd
of that?
be, Lane County Health and Human Services, Peace Health. We heard from the Advocates Organization, which I think has got some status as a recognized consumer organization. And then I would say that's the premise, a joint meeting. What are we going to do? It occurred to me that one of the things we could be talking about is the role of Lane County's clinics in taking over this program. If Sacred Heart's decided to end it, and I know the advocacy group wants to have a meeting with them, which this would accomplish, but really what's going, assuming they're closing it, what can we do to make sure this birthing service is available? And my sense is that it's economical. It's not going to not pencil out. But maybe not.
I think we need to
Yeah.
analyze that.
But in terms of you answered your question, what does the board want? My sense is we want to have this discussion, and we want to have it at a pretty high level. And suggestions to add in people such as the governor's office or Oregon Health Authority or the advocates group would be more than just a joint meeting of the Board of Commissioners and Sacred Heart.
Okay.
So our staff could do a briefing. Yep.
I have a new agenda item to request.
Okay.
Or
Why don't we,
assignment.
yeah, why don't we finish that, and then I'll call on you, Commissioner, to go into the third work session idea. So anything further on either of the first two? Mr. Mokryski?
No.
No. Very good.
Got it.
Commissioner Bozovich?
What I'm asking for is not necessarily a work session, but for staff to prepare a letter to the state notifying them that we believe they've triggered the opt-out level of the community corrections, and we are studying our options relative to continued provision of community corrections. Just as a notification, as a placeholder, I think it's very important, because if we don't put them on notice, next biennium, they can go back and say, well, you guys accepted your grants, at that level, and that's now the level of service that's acceptable. The time study means nothing. So I believe that between legal counsel and Mr. Kyler, they can draft a letter for us to sign and send on to the state as the board, just to provide that notice. It doesn't necessarily mean we'll opt out, but if we don't at least object and say we believe they've hit that opt-out level, then we've kind of lost our ability to say it 2 years from now.
I think that the modification I would propose here is to have parole and probation, PSCC, Lane County Legal come up, and Alex Schuyler come up with a letter that, in light of what has transpired, gives a cogent statement to the state that we don't like what they did, and to the extent that we're intimating that we're going to give a complete notice, which I don't think this letter should do, we should just reacquaint them with that option. That's.
But I think we need to clearly state that we believe they've hit the opt-out dollar level.
Yeah, and I'm saying, I just want to make sure that parole and probation and legal and legislative affairs and PSCC all, basically bless this.
Good with that, yeah.
Okay.
We don't need to actually say we're going to
Yeah.
exercise that in the future or anything,
Okay.
but I agree.
I have a new one.
Okay, let's finish
But
this
let's see if
one.
we got three.
Yeah, let's finish
Oh,
this
yeah.
one first.
Yeah, we got three. I support that. I support the synthesis that was just described between the two commissioners. because if we don't do that, we lose the opportunity to leverage a change in the February, right? February session. And I think that's what we want to preserve.
Right. Anything further on this topic? Okay, seeing none, then you'll have your direction, Mr. Mokryski, on that. Commissioner Buck.
We talked about this several weeks, well, everything feels like several weeks ago now. We haven't been here in a while.
20 years ago. Sorry to hear that, Pete.
We discussed potentially putting a work session together on what it would take to bring the county to a level where we could have $15 minimum entry-level wage. And so I know that our staff was in the middle of several items, which they still will be, but I would, since it does take a while to get things on our work session calendar, I'd like to have that conversation when we can get to it.
And just for clarification, this is to discuss or have a work session on the implications of having a minimum $15 an hour minimum for Lane County employment, Lane County government employment.
Correct.
Okay, I'm good with that, especially if we don't have a specific date when we're going to do it.
Yeah, they'll need some time to
Yeah.
look at that.
Okay. There are 3 commissioners that want to move ahead with that, okay?
Didn't we, never mind.
No, go ahead.
No, I can't say it. I just realized I cannot say what I was going to say. So.
Okay, well then, don't say it.
I'll say it.
It didn't even occur to me what it was going to be, no. And
Breachy sex session.
And I can mention to Ms. Ouellette that at this point in the board's meeting, sometimes we just sort of break down because we're so exhausted up here. So that was a partial example of that. So. Anything further on this?
Just a clarification that I'm wondering if it would make sense to start with an executive session discussion because it's related to, I mean, ultimately, compensation for employees is an issue of bargaining, and we typically talk about all of those things, and we start with those. You wouldn't take action, but at least you would have that discussion and evaluate some information before moving forward to a public conversation. So I just want to see if that was a place that you would want to start before having a public meeting about it.
I'll jump in and Commissioner Buck can answer also. I will just say that distinguishing a bargaining session from a policy is my understanding of what the line is between executive session. I think what I'm looking forward to is a policy discussion of what governments have done this, what are the implications of setting a $15 compensation minimum for Lane County government employment. I don't want to get into a bargaining discussion with a particular bargaining unit or group of employees. That the focus really is on the policy issue of the $15 per hour or not, and who's doing it and what it would cost us if we did it. But I'm just talking for myself here, speaking for myself. So Commissioner Bucks.
And I just raised the question because it's a mandatory subject of bargaining under
Yeah.
state labor laws. So that's why I asked the question.
Well, if you're bargaining, but if you're just discussing a policy for your community. So Commissioner Buck, go ahead.
I'm fine with what you described, Chair. Ultimately, though, we're going to get into dollars about how this would, if it could be implemented, how much it's actually going to cost. And if that requires an exec session, so be it. I don't know that we're there yet. I think starting out with, concepts of policy would be fine. And then if we move into dollars, then perhaps we could move there.
So then an additional clarification, do you want staff to present information do you want us to do research and present information as part of that, or you just want to have an item whereby the board talks about the issue?
I would think we want to, clearly I would love to hear all the members' ideas and interest in the subject, but I would also like to know what other jurisdictions are doing, and see where we are aligning and where we're not aligning with what we're seeing in other areas of the state. And if they did implement a policy, how did they go through that process?
Thank you.
Okay, any other items under 11B, agenda team requests and work session requests? Okay, seeing none, we can move to review of assignments.
So I had those four. Commissioner Sorensen's request for a work session regarding the Peace Health Birthing Center to include county staff, Peace Health staff, state agencies and advocates. The work session on a housing bond to include Mr. Eisenberg. Did I get that right?
No, his.
Eisenbach.
Eisenbach.
County H&HS staff, budgets and finance staff, Better Housing Together, and potentially others involved in housing matters. Commissioner Bozovich's request to send a letter to the state notifying them of the triggered opt-out based on CCA allocations for the role in parole and probation. We'll have county council and our other staff draft that. And then Commissioner Buck's request to have a work session on a $15 minimum wage regarding what other jurisdictions are doing on this matter, how it's been implemented, and how it's going.
For county staff specifically, $15 minimum wage for
Counties, for county governments. Yeah, right. Okay. Mr. Chair, unless there's clarifications there, I had a couple of announcements we didn't get to.
Could I, Steve?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Unless it conflicts with your intent, I don't see why we'd be limited to counties, just municipalities. Is there a reason why you wanted to limit that to counties?
Well, I think if it goes further, that's a much bigger discussion. And I was thinking to start somewhere, we could start with ourselves. That was just.
No, that's fine.
And we can query, there are listservs, we can query the cities
That's
and
what I
counties
figured,
throughout
yeah.
the state.
It wouldn't
to say
take you
who's
much
doing-
more.
We may not get an exhaustive list from but we can at least give you the responses that we have from our peers, focused on counties and look at our comparables in particular, but also put it out to other local government agencies and see what we get.
Thank you. I was just curious. Okay. Yep.
Okay, so let's go back to your announcements then, Mr.
Just two quick
Mokowski.
things, Mr. Chair. One, I wanted to let the board know on Thursday, July 18th, next Thursday, between 5 to 9 p.m., the City of Eugene will be hosting a town square party at the park blocks to showcase 3 different design options for the redesign of the town square. This is something that Lane County has been actively involved with, particularly through our joint efforts over the last couple years. Working with Cameron McCarthy and the City of Eugene has continued that work. So Thursday, July 18th from 5 to 9 p.m., they will have 3 concepts that are based on input from the community that was held during an Imagination Lab event in May, as well as continued collaboration with various stakeholders. So it's a great opportunity to preview the process and designs before the town square team presents a formal update to the board and the council later this year. So again, next Thursday, 5 to 9 p.m. in the park blocks for anyone who is interested. Mike Penwell, our capital projects manager, and Austin Ramirez, our interim economic development manager, continue to be involved along with the city staff and partners on that effort. And then secondly, there have been a couple emails that have come in about our temporary parking lot from commissioners who've had questions from constituents or interested folks who saw it go up really quickly and just wondered about sort of the permitting and whether or not it meets city code and all of those things. So wanted to share for the board's benefit. Mike Penwell, our capital project manager who used to work at the City of Eugene, has been leading this effort. It is a temporary parking lot. So this is the new City Hall block that Lane County acquired the former City Hall block that is now the courthouse block that Lane County acquired in January of this year. And we transitioned that into a temporary parking lot. It is what is defined as an allowable unpermitted use at the site because the county is actively planning a permanent use for the site. We're planning a Lane County Courthouse and Justice Center for that site. The city approved it as an allowable unpermitted use. So it is not permitted, but it is allowed because it's temporary and particularly because of the material that was used. The Roll Park geotextile fabric is a temporary paving solution with an expected life of 3 to 5 years. As we've talked about, the material has various environmental benefits, including filtering contaminants through the pervious surface, as well as reduced resource consumption in the manufacture of the installation. First place west of the Mississippi that this material has been used. If you actually touch it, it feels like felt. So it's a lower cost, temporary use, and with those environmental benefits. We've had a lot of feedback about the improved aesthetic appearance of the block. While we did not spend a lot of money on landscaping or other improvements that would be required with a permanent parking lot, they are not required with a temporary lot for an allowable unpermitted use. We think it still looks better after the vacant lot that was there for 6 or 7 years. So hopefully that answers some of the questions for all of you. If you do get questions, comments, it is absolutely a temporary use until we move forward with our courthouse and Justice Center project.
If I may, I just wanted to thank Steve publicly because I at least was one that received some input and you responded to it immediately, thoroughly, satisfactorily to the people. So thank you very much.
And if I may, I had questions over the weekend, and Mike Penwell was absolutely spot on in his responses, answered all the questions. And this morning, coming in over the Ferry Street Bridge, I spotted it. The first time I ever had a reason to look in that direction, and it was because it looks pretty good, even without landscaping.
Well, and we've had downtown businesses and technology entrepreneurs that moved in downtown who have complained for several years now about the lack of parking that's available. And of course, we lost well over 100, I think it was, parking spots at the Six and Oak property. So we're seeing a reduction there. So actually adding to the capacity for downtown businesses and visitors is really critical. So that's all I had, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Pretty full.
Okay, so it's now my intent to recess the board meeting, and then we'll call for the executive session, then recess the board meeting to convene in the Commissioners' Conference Room, then probably not come out of executive session, although there is an item on item 14, other business, in case we need to come out. But it's my hope that we don't come out and we just get our briefing in our executive session. So at this time, I'll announce also that we have our board meeting next on July 23 and the morning of July 24th. There's also a Homes for Good meeting on the afternoon of Wednesday, July 24. So we'll have 2 full days. We also have our evening public comment session on July 23 in the evening here in Harris Hall. So before I read the executive session, are there any other comments commissioners want to make before we go into that? Any concerns from administration? Okay. So item 13 is our executive session. The Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body, to carry on labor negotiations, to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions, and to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, E, and H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision will be made and may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out of public session should the need arise. So at this time, I'm going to recess the public portion of the Board of Commissioners meeting, and in approximately 5 minutes, convene the Board of Commissioners in its executive session in the Commissioners' conference room. Thank you.